Okay, we shall start. Thank you everybody for some of you for coming back. Other people kind of left town. I guess my talk was not very eventful last week, but anyways. So we're going to continue our talk on youth culture, and just as a recap from last week, we really focused on postmodernism and what led to postmodernism. We talked about pre-modernism, modernism, and how we now are currently in the era of postmodernism. Don't be alarmed if you missed last week. We're going to really delve today into much more detail about the three main tenets of postmodernism. We talked about it briefly last week, but today we're really going to dive into it in quite a bit of detail to really understand what this is all about. So just as a review, postmodernism consists of secularism, spirituality, and selfism. Those are the three main sort of ideas or knowledge bases or tenets of postmodern thought. So secularism, it's one of the three belief systems as we talked about, and it basically talks or highlights or includes anything which excludes God and His truth, believing it to either be neither non-existent or irrelevant. Okay, that's essentially what secularism is. I'm sure you're all familiar with the term. And underneath secularism, you have three main beliefs, and we'll go over these beliefs right now. Let's not get too over. It can get highly technical with the terms, but I think it's important that we just have a high level of when you hear this term, what does this term refer to? What does it mean? And you will hear these terms nowadays, and those are existentialism, humanism, and relativism. So basically, existentialism comes from the term or the foundation that existence takes precedence over essence. In other words, we exist first without any predetermined nature, and later on we determine our own nature or essence through our actions. Okay? The existentialist believes that life has no inherent meaning and that we define our own meanings. So everything comes from us. We are the creator of all meaning of our life. We are the foundation of everything. The individual defines everything. What are the implications? Well, the implications are essentially the views of freedom and value arise from the view of the individual. Whatever the individual feels is true. We have absolute freedom over our internal nature, and the source of value can only be internal. So again, everything revolves around the human being. What is the existentialist view of human nature? We have no predetermined nature or essence, okay, that controls who we are and what we do. So therefore, we are free to act independently of outside influence, yet at the same time, we are still responsible for action, our own actions. Then we have humanism. Humanism arose, if you remember, we spoke about the Renaissance and how that was a big human movement, and how man became enamored with themselves, with art and poetry and science and knowledge. And so it really rose out of this Renaissance movement, which basically means human achievement is the central focus, or arose out of that concept. And the secular humanists took root in the 18th century through Enlightenment and celebrated human ability, and here's the key, independent of divine authority. The idea is our human skills, our human abilities, our strengths and what we are able to create and the knowledge we're able to know it comes from human. There is no outside force. No thank you, Jesus, for your strength, and thank you, Jesus, for your blessings, none of that. What are the basic tenets? They obviously reject religious faith, authority, and revelation as any source of knowledge. So any divine revelation, they reject that as any source of knowledge. It's a philosophy of here and now. Okay, they regard human values as making sense in the context of human life rather than in any sort of afterlife. There's no concept of an afterlife. It's humans, we live here and now, and everything exists around here and now. And it's a philosophy of compassion. Human ethics is solely concerned with meeting human needs. Then we move over to relativism. Relativism is a philosophy that teaches that concepts of truth and moral values are not absolute, okay, but are relative, as in the title, to the groups holding them. So basically, to dumb it down, or to simplify it even further, they all assert that one thing, any a standard of moral values or knowledge, is relative to some particular framework, another standpoint, and they deny, okay, that any standpoint is uniquely privileged over others. So basically, everything is relative, and there is no one relative standpoint that has a higher value or that is more correct than another relative standpoint. The arguments for relativism. So if you're a relativist, how do you support this? They use the term here, the primacy of de facto values. And essentially, what does that refer to here? They argue that the understanding of morality should be based on how people actually behave and not an ideal standard. So the idea is, if you have a group of people and they're behaving a certain way, that is the relative moral truth that we're going to go by. We're not going to go by what they ought to act based on how a textbook tells us to act, or or a better understanding of our behavior ought to be. It's everybody's behaving this way, and everybody agrees with this, then that's the moral value that we're going to go with. That's the consensus. That is the right correct path or correct way to go about things. And obviously with that comes cultural variation. So they believe that one culture might label a behavior wrong, whereas another culture might label it right, and that's perfectly fine. Obviously it flows from having a consensus, defines what right is wrong, and therefore that follows that cultural variation, depending on the culture that you're in, is going to depend, or is going to determine the moral set of standard, or the moral guidebook. What I really like about this text, it always goes back to biblical defense of a lot of things that it talks about. So the biblical perspective of the three philosophical beliefs, and you'll see the summary after every group of things we speak about. Basically, it's saying that an irrational and impersonal universe, the individual defines everything. That's existentialism. Humanism, man has freedom, responsibility, and capability of making right choices. Okay, this is just a summary of all the beliefs we talked about. Truth and moral values are not absolute, but are relative to a person's group holding them. That's relativism. So although they're slightly different, if you kind of summarize all these in one sentence, basically they create a worldview, and remember we spoke about worldview last week, where God is considered non-existent or irrelevant. Man is exalted to a place in which he balances between good and evil. Of course, we know that since the beginning of the time, this is the sin of man, the main sin, and we know from the time of Adam and Eve. And in Genesis, it clearly says here, the Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and care for it, but the Lord gave him this warning: you may freely eat of any fruit in garden except for the fruit from the tree of knowledge and good of evil. If you eat its fruit, surely you will die. And so we are reminded that God never intended that for us, that we ought to determine our own what is good or what is bad. It is determined from God, and it's rules that we kind of follow from them. What are the values of secularism? The first value, and if you notice, we talk about the beliefs, we talk about values, we're going to talk about behavior, the same sort of categories we spoke about on how cultures are defined. And we're going to go through that through each of these tenets or components. The first one is reason, and reason is more important than revelation. So the idea is there is no divine revelation. There is nothing out there. If a human can reason it, if we can come together and make sense of something, then that has to be the absolute truth. There is no absolute truth beyond something that we can conjure or reason on our own merits. And then obviously in responding to this, we declare our belief in the Bible as God's inspired and inerrant word. And if this word gives us instruction in living, that transcends and applies to all cultures. Okay. Bible obviously clearly says all scripture is inspired by God and is useful to teach us what is true. Again, the idea is if this doesn't make sense to me, it doesn't sound reasonable to me, then it's not true. As opposed to me taking the word of God that is, has been revealed through the Holy Spirit and written down for generations. And if that doesn't make sense, I don't have to take the word of the gospel truth. Applications, and this is always going to be there. What are the implications? Obviously, for youth ministry is no matter how much we have learned and experienced, we become in the ministry, we continue to express our independence on God's revelation to us. We must never sway from the truth of the gospel in our lives and in our ministry. The second value is tolerance is more important than truth. I love these things because you could see it playing out in today's world over everything. We almost always want to make everybody feel good at the expense of truth. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, as long as we do it and we're nice and we're kind to people. But upholding truth is not always the most important thing. And the implications of this value, as you can see, it is wrong to criticize the convictions of others. Okay? It is a value that can never be applied consistently, because imagine if you were to apply that in the criminal justice system and so on and so forth. We are called, it's very important because Christians are often categorized as being bigots or prejudiced or this and that. But we are called to be tolerant of people, but not tolerant of their error, okay, or not tolerant of their behavior. The idea is you don't judge the person, you judge the action. So it's very important that although we are tolerant of people, we have to maintain the truth. We have to maintain the essence of truth. Preach the word of God, be persistent, whether the time is favored or not. And if you go further down, for the time is coming when people will no longer listen to right teaching. They will follow their own desires and look for teachers who will tell them whatever they want to hear. The gospel written thousands of years ago is telling us now the truths that we're living in now. Obviously, what are the implications of the youth ministry? And this is very, very important because oftentimes, especially in our Orthodox church, it seems harsh. It seems a lot of rules, a lot of guides, a lot of things that we got to stay by. And oftentimes there are other, denominations or other, I'm not necessarily talking about other religions, but even groups that, they kind of let go of all the rules and then let go of all the structure. And with that, it's going to let go of some truth as well, just so that you could be more tolerant and allow more people in. You must be willing to teach young people the truth, even if it's unpopular. We must confront firmly, but with gentleness and humility. And again, careful in how we do it, not to attack who disagree or disobey, people who disagree or disobey with biblical truth, but to approach it in a kind and loving way. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. Sincerity. The third value of secularism is sincerity is more important than substance. So again, the idea is here, as long as you are sincere in what you're doing and you really mean it, it doesn't really matter if what you're doing is right or wrong. Okay? So the biblical response here is that sincerity does not alter truth. It's possible to be right without being sincere, just as it is possible to be sincere and wrong. Okay? So again, the idea is finding ways to adopt the truth or change the truth just to accommodate other people's feelings. And what are the implications for this in youth ministry? Postmodernism helps us to understand why there is frequently more appetite for spiritual excitement than careful spiritual explanation. Oftentimes, especially as you're in all our lives and in youth ministry, the youth, you might get them excited about certain things, or they may get very emotional and very drawn about things. But the idea is, was there substance relayed? Are they excited about the right things? Or are they just excited about something that sounds great? And an example here I love, because when we teach young people, we must not emphasize conviction over content. So what are they really emotional about? What are they really convicted about? What's exciting them? Is it just the feeling? Is it just an empty feeling, or is there real substance to it. And so the great example the text gives is that it was a great message, but I can't remember what they said. So if your youth leave your class, and teaching Sunday school, the youth class is just a small component of your ministry. But if they leave your class and they remember feeling good, but they don't remember what you said, well, maybe we need to clarify the message a little bit. What are the behaviors of secularism? So some of the behaviors are situation ethics. So basically, this form of ethics can become ethical in the ethical norm of a postmodernist culture in which there are no absolutes or black and white, only shades of gray. So as the term suggests, situation ethics. So the ethics will change based on the situation that you're in. There's also new attitudes about older situations, such as, for example, old issues like abortion and things of that are coming to rise now. There's a lot of situations or decisions that were made in the past that are now becoming points of contention, and people are constantly talking about it, trying to alter history or alter decisions that were made. New dilemmas, ethical dilemmas that were not heard a few years ago are now carrying a lot of debate. Euthanasia, surrogate parenting, genetic engineering are all examples of things that are now up for debate because there's so many more different opinions that are taken into consideration. There's so many different viewpoints that were not first considered acceptable are now being considered acceptable. And because of that, you have a lot of changeable commitments. And you'll notice, I'm sure you've already noticed this in society, in a culture where there are no absolutes, only choices, young people adopt a worldview that resists absolute choices. For example, you have family instability. The greatest area of change in social behavior is concerned with the family. Before there used to be this concept of the nuclear family, where you had mom and dad and one boy and one girl. But now all of a sudden that's very rare, and you even see it on TV. You'll be hard pressed to find a TV show where you have just a regular nuclear family. I'm not saying there's something wrong with you if you're not, but I'm saying now it hasn't become the norm in society. Young people living with both biological parents has become the exception. There's no longer that commitment to marriage that it was before, and consequently, people don't have a good model of commitment in their lives, and therefore the reluctance for commitment. Transitory lifestyle. So the author kind of equates this whole idea where the youth are exposed to no commitment and not and changing all the time, how that affects their lives. So people, he says here, are moving more often, they're changing their careers more often because they don't have the commitment to the career, or they don't have the commitment to their job. And so that all kind of interplays with this lack of commitment and this lack of being committed to a decision that you've made. Personal morality. Of course, this is obviously going to be affected by this. And, they talk about sexual behavior and how now before, living together, a man and a woman living together before marriage was unheard of, but now it's almost commonplace. It's almost accepted in the secular world. And if you don't, you're kind of, you kind of thought of as old school or old fashioned. Having children before you get married, it's very commonplace now. Before, it used to be taboo. It used to be something that was frowned upon, but now it's very commonplace. Adultery now is labeled as an affair, and increasingly arouses more curiosity than criticism. Obviously, sexual choice, that's a big one now, and it's taking up a lot of headlines. I know we discussed an article last week about that. So now, choices with everything. You don't even have to commit to being born your gender. You can choose to change gender if you want. Censorship and things such as pornography, that's much more acceptable now in the public domain. So that, we finished there talking about secularism. So just for the people who just came, last week we talked about postmodernism and how that included Postmodernism, and that included three main things. We talked about secularism, we talked about spirituality. We're going to talk about spirituality right now, and then selfism. So those are the three main components of postmodernism, and we're getting into that. We briefly talked about them last week, but today we're really diving deep into them. So let's move on here to spirituality. Spirituality, and we talked about the irony in that term, spirituality. You're talking about we're heading into a time where people don't want to talk about God and they don't want to talk about religious items, but the author says how because they found that they didn't have anything, no hope, they had to turn to something spiritual, and it's not going to be God, but something else spiritual. They're still in search of that spiritual thing that they can't see, and they're trying to kind of make a relationship with that. So yeah, so in modern thought, there was no place for spirituality. It was just basically science, technology, whatever a human could do. But now, perhaps a reaction to the hopelessness which is offered spiritual belief has become popular again. It rejects, now it's important to mention, it rejects the notion of an absolute truth again. Everybody can have their own spiritual absolute truth, but there is this idea of spirituality that postmodernists believe in. So what are some of these ideas? You have agnosticism, which is derived from the word agnost. I'm sure you've heard of this word, the Greek word gnosis, which means to know, and a prefix of a. So basically the idea is here, the belief is without resorting to a knowledge which goes beyond reason. So he found that he could not answer the questions. This gentleman here by the name of Thomas Huxley found he could not really know for sure if there was a God. He couldn't prove it or he couldn't disprove it. So because he didn't have enough knowledge to do that, therefore the word gnosis and the a meaning not, so not enough knowledge to determine, therefore I am resorting to that. I am resorting to the standpoint that I don't have knowledge and therefore I cannot make a decision about the existence of God. There are two types of agnostics. There's the strong and there are the weaks. The weak agnosticism. So the idea is here requires knowledge. The idea requires knowledge about reality to know this for sure. Some people hold that this the position is self-defeating. So the criticism to this is that every time you try to make a decision, you can't make a decision, and therefore you can't. Well, what's the point of even having a viewpoint like this? It's gonna be self-defeating all the time. And then the other category is weak agnosticism, which simply claims that he does not know whether God exists, and this means he does not exclude the possibility or include the possibility of God existing. Another one of the spiritual things we talked about agnosticism. Now we have pantheism. The idea here, it is referring to a system of belief that asserts that God is everything and everything is God. In other words, the word is either identical with God or in some way a self-expression of his nature. Little heavy slide here, but just basically to go over it very quickly, you have naturalistic pantheism, which believes that the universe either originated itself out of nothing or has existed forever. You have modern or scientific pantheism, which is materialistic, and it believes that the design in the universe can be fully accounted for by principles of evolution. You have modern or neo-paganism, which is a revival and reconstruction of ancient nature religion. And finally, you have pan-psychic pantheism. It's a new age where basically it refers to the individual has a God within them. Another sort of spiritual theme in postmodernism is mysticism. And mysticism is basically a name of practices or experiences or awareness in which awareness and or union with God is the ultimate reality or main focus. You can argue that there's variations of mysticism. within the main religions such as Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and so on and so forth. Another thing to note is that mysticism in its broadest sense can also include occultic practices that want to communicate with the spirit world. So we want to keep that in mind. So what are the basic tenets is that to regard God as outside the soul, which rises to God by successive stages, or to regard God as dwelling within the soul. So the idea is God is this thing that you're trying to get to, and the goal is you want to get to this God. And so there's a reality beyond the material world which is uncreated, and you approach that reality through a series of steps and various rituals that involve distinguishing ego from true self. So we'll review here agnosticism. Basically, to summarize, this summarizes the last three things. God, if he exists, can never be known. God is everything, and everything is God. The goal of spirituality is an experience of God, and that's mysticism. So while these three philosophies are all different, they combine the worldview that if God exists at all, is some impersonal, distant entity whom we must somehow strive to encounter. It's important to have an idea of these because, you will be challenged. Everybody says, oh, we're just like Christianity or this and that. So it's important to, kind of weed out a little bit, have an idea of this so you can weed out some of the fluff when you're encountered with it. Ephesians 2:12 says, in those days you will be living apart from Christ. You were excluded from God's people Israel, and you did not know the promises God had made to them. You lived in this world without God and without hope. The idea is that God, just going back to the previous slide here, while these philosophies are all different, they combine and create a worldview where God, if he exists, as some impersonal, distant entity whom we somehow strive to encounter. So when God is viewed this way, and when difficulty and discouragement strike, it is easy for people to lose hope. So the idea is we want to battle that notion that God is some distant thing that's not accessible or that we have to strive to get to. When our young people are feeling this way, we can present to them a God who offers hope. Our God is not distant and impersonal, but near and loving. Psalm 145, the Lord is close to all who call on him. Yes, to all who call on him sincerely, and he fulfills the desires of those who fear him. What are the values of spirituality? Postmodern spiritual belief leads to certain values. First, it's creation. The creation is more important than creator. So obviously, the implications of this is that spirituality becomes man-centered rather than God-centered. The biblical response is our purpose is to glorify him, not to satisfy ourselves. Romans 1:25 says, instead of believing what they know was the truth about God, they deliberately chose to believe lies. And what is the implication for this for youth ministry? And that's always something we need to focus on. We need to develop a God-centered approach to faith, which young people can develop a high view of God. Help them to see that Christianity is not about what we get. It's about acknowledging what is true and then loving and then living to serve God. I think that is sort of, and we're going to get at this deeper on today, it's an overarching theme is that, especially with today's youth, it's always, okay, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? And the maturity is that you realize that, living a Christian life is not what's in it for you. It's about what you can give to others. And that's the issue sometimes. One of the issues or one of the overarching themes of postmodern thought is that, what about me? What am I getting out of this? What's in it for me? Pragmatism. The second value of postmodernism, and basically here, pragmatism is more important than principle. So the idea here is as long as you could find a solution or be thoughtful in your process, it doesn't matter what you're breaking or what principles you're breaking, as long as there's a smart way of solving this. So because there's no fixed spiritual principles in postmodernism, people are free to adopt any approach to spirituality, picking those aspects that fit their own concept of reality. And a biblical response to this is, of course, Christianity is not about finding, what works for us. And that's the key thing, right? Like all of these ideas and methodologies are all about finding what works for you. And you see where that breaks down. Christianity is not about that. We're not about changing it so we could feel better about ourselves. It's about amending ourselves so we could fit with the word. Christianity is true whether or not it seems to work. I love that statement. And when it does not seem to work, the biblical response is to re-examine our lives, not to reinvent God. Galatians 1, it says, you are already following a different way that pretends to be good news, but it is not good news at all. You are being fooled by those who twist and change the truth concerning Christ. What is the implications for this in youth ministry? To help young people understand the narrowness of biblical truth and the error of the alternative approach. Teach Christian faith as a take-it-all or leave-it-all proposition, not as a faith that has some truth and can be mixed with other beliefs. We've got to teach them to a realistic appreciation of Christian faith. When it does not appear to work for them, let's avoid the simplistic answers when we speak to them. Let's really help them battle the answer or get to the heart of it. Because when they find the real answer, they'll be able to apply it in other times in their lives. What is the behavior of spirituality? So first is spiritual fascination. Okay, under modernists, again, this spiritual was relegated by many as irrelevant. But now with the rise of postmodernism, we are seeing this fascination in the spiritual dimension for young people. And what are these characteristics? How do they look like? You have this fascination with the occult. So fascination with fortune telling or medium and psychics, astrology. People are looking elsewhere to find interest in the spiritual world and what it means to them. Fascination with the new age. You have meditation, alternative medicine, yoga is really big. The roots, I'm not against yoga, but some of the roots of yoga were actually quite had some religious implications. There's obviously not as much that right now, but some of the roots there are derived from that. You have spiritual consumerism. Basically, the idea here is the desire for spiritual reality in a postmodern environment where there are no absolutes. They encourage people for personal fulfillment. So people want a spiritual experience that brings them some sort of experience to God. So if you can't experience it, then it's not real. So you can think of right away how easy you could, I don't experience it. Let me change something else. Let me go to something else that's easier. Let me stop really trying to work hard at this exercise. If I'm not feeling it, let me change. Let me go to something else. They want a spiritual experience that brings them ease. Something that makes them feel good, right? It doesn't make me feel good. If it's not working for me. Let me change. Let me go on to something else. People are looking for personal power. They approach it as what's in it for me. So it can sometimes spirituality can be used as a means to gain personal satisfaction, to sort of give them more wealth or give them better health, and that sort of there's nothing wrong in achieving those things, but people are looking for in that dimension to gain those worldly things as opposed to for the real reason. And again, these trends in spirituality affect us in the church as we work with young people. Many young people are seeking after the spectacular spiritual gifts for personal use. Spiritual isolation. So in the mind of Israel and the early church, Christian faith was a corporate experience or an experience with many people. But yet this is changing in the postmodern view. And there's a whole range of spiritual beliefs that are following this behavior. For example, you have individual isolation. Fewer people are relying on a meeting or institution to meet their spiritual needs. You can look everything up online. You can do your own research. You can kind of find your own meaning of life. And you don't have other physical people or other people to help guide you, people who are more mature in their spiritual journey to help guide you. So you can obviously see the danger in adopting this. Tribal isolation. He uses the term tribal often, which I find quite interesting. So the idea is you find a group, your own little tribe, But as much as you are in a group, you're isolated because it's just your group and that's it. You create your own meanings, you create your own views about things, you create your own facts and beliefs. So we have to be careful about these because they can have a big influence on the group or the clique of youth and their friends and how they're behaving and what they're doing. And finally, we'll go on to the third tenet, which is selfism. So basically here is a belief system which young people are left to determine their own truth, including their own beliefs about spirituality. And the idea here is it's an approach that leads to a self-centered approach to life. So what are the beliefs of selfism? I'm sure you've all heard of the term a narcissism or a narcissist. So just a bit of history here. It's derived from in Greek mythology, Narcissus, who refused all love. And as a punishment for his indifference, he was made to fall in love with his own image in a pool and became so absorbed in himself that he eventually turned into a flower. So the idea here is the ingredients of narcissism are self-love beliefs, and the heart of it is pride and arrogance, self-promotion often at the expense of others, or a preoccupation of physical appearance. Self-centered belief, the narcissists hold the belief that we need to look out for number one, which is myself. Okay, self-worth beliefs, and instead worth is frequently measured by status, money, and power. So the idea is if you don't have status, if you don't have money and power, you're not worth much. We talked about narcissism. Hedonism is another sort of item under selfism, and it is only basically the belief that is only what is pleasant or has pleasant consequences is intrinsically good, and therefore pleasure is the highest good. So the idea in life is just to have pleasure. So that's a nice way of going about life, I guess. What are the basic tenets of that? Is that the hedonist makes value judgment based on the feeling. Their motto is, if it feels good, let's do it. There is no immediate, all that matters is they're doing things for now. So the hedonist lives for the moment. There isn't any the thought of what are the consequences of this action later on. And there's instant gratification. So the idea is it sees no reason to delay gratification. If it's going to make me feel good, I want it now. So expressions of hedonism, there's sensual hedonism. So the idea here is the pursuit of pleasure through direct stimulation of the senses. There's purposeful hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure through achievement. So this is interesting because this is a little different than the other. So the idea is you're pursuing achievement just to feel good to feel good about yourself. There's nothing bad about trying to achieve good things and be successful in what you do, but to achieve it for its own purpose can be a form of hedonism. Recreational hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure through activities that relax in order to relieve stress in life. I'm sure you could imagine what type of forms that could come in. Then we have materialism, is the theory that physical matter is the only reality and that everything, including thought, feeling, mind, and will be explained in terms of matter and physical phenomena. So what are the basic tenets? Are materialism provides status. The more we have, the more highly people think of us. Materialism provides satisfaction. Obviously this is very inherent in our society. It's everywhere, right? Materialism promises happiness, and it provides security. The more we have, the more certain or confident or comfortable we feel about our future. There's consumerism. Obviously, it goes right under. It's the driving force for materialism, and it's driven. It assumes that people won't buy what they don't need, and therefore consumerism involves careful marketing, and it also assumes that people want choice. So the idea is let's give them as much choice for the consumer as possible. It's very important. What are the three biblical sort of responses to this? We have, through narcissism, satisfaction can be found through self-love or love of self. Hedonism, satisfaction can be found through pleasure. And materialism, satisfaction and security can be found through material possessions. Obviously, this worldview basically of these three says where the source of satisfaction and security is found in who we are and what we do and what we have. There's obviously no room for these beliefs for a God-centered approach in our lives. You know, Jesus said to the disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must put aside your selfish ambition, shoulder your cross, and follow me. If you try to keep your life for yourself, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find true life. And how do you benefit? If you gain the whole world and lose your own soul in the process, is anything worth more than your soul? It's amazing how the biblical teachings are so specific and so direct about all these beliefs that have developed years later. In Jesus' words, he addresses satisfaction through self-love in verse 24, not through self-promotion, but through dying to self and following him. You know, satisfaction through self-sacrifice in verse 25. Satisfaction comes not through serving one's own desire, but through making sacrifice for the benefit of others. And in verse 26, he talks about earthly possession may satisfy for a time, but lasting satisfaction comes through wealth and accrued after in the afterlife. What are the values of selfism? First value is that self is more important than sacrifice. Okay, we obviously see that in the title. This value leads to a self-centered way of living. The biblical response to this is very clear. In 1 Corinthians, it says, "This is the plan I follow too. I try to please everyone in everything I do." You know, that is, and I don't just do what I like or what is best for me, but what is best for them so they may be saved. How can you find two more contrasting statements, you know, when you talk about the biblical view of that versus the view of selfism? And this has a very important implications for youth ministry. First of all, by providing opportunities for service in youth ministry, we are not only benefiting the recipients, but we teach young people important lessons about kingdom values, and that satisfaction comes through sacrifice. You know, I've heard, I don't know how many surveys about happiness and how people gain true happiness and who are the happiest people in the world. And you know, one of the common theme that always comes, the common theme that always comes is to achieve the highest level of happiness, and this is whether it's Christian or not Christian, is those who take time to help others, those who volunteer their time to help others, whether it be a purpose that you have, but giving time from yourself, it can lead to the ultimate state of happiness. So it's really interesting that, you know, our Bible was saying this thousands of years ago, but now, just now, they're coming up with these studies and surveys of how to achieve these things, and they're coming back to the same stuff we were taught thousands of years ago. Youth leadership provides us with an opportunity to demonstrate sacrifice. You know, I think I speak, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but a lot of reasons why, if you've been served, you want to serve. Why? Because you've seen that example. You've seen the example of service growing up. And most of you may have, some of you may not have, and just been inspired by other people. But at some point, you've seen some sort of, most likely you've seen some sort of example of servanthood or sacrifice or service in your life that you want to emulate that. So you think of that, how you're having that example to the youth that you serve. And so the cycle keeps going on and on. If you continue to influence the youth that you serve, they will grow up and want to influence the youth that they're going to be able to serve down the road. Rights. The second value of selfism is that rights are more important than responsibilities. What are the implications for this? Is that we hear people in our society asserting their rights, the right to freedom of speech and the right to make their own decisions about decency and morality. And some rights are necessary for God's plan, but other rights are very self-centered and can be destructive. what is the biblical response to this? Rights concern what I want. The Bible talks often about responsibilities, not rights. Rights concern what I want for me, whereas responsibilities concern what I want for others. Okay, so that's a very important distinction. A focus on rights typifies self-love, whereas focus on responsibility leads to true Christian love. In 1 Corinthians, it says, "What then is my pay? It is the satisfaction I get from preaching the good news." And again, this leads to a little bit what we were speaking to earlier. The implications for youth ministry is discipleship includes teaching young people to consider the rights of others and looking for ways to see how they are met. Young people need to have an opportunity to take on responsibilities in the youth ministry. And that's always very important as well, to teach them the responsibility at a young age. Obviously, you're guiding them. So these are, not only are you allowing them to take ownership for any project or any activity that they may have in the youth ministry, but it always teaches them responsibility and how to give back to others. And finally, and here the third value is convenience. Convenience is more important than character. And the idea is, we know this because in our culture, everything is fast. We want everything very quickly. There's no more wait and wait for it. It builds more character. Back in the day when the internet was first introduced, we used to have to wait for dial-up. And until we dial up, you guys don't even know what that means. Now, if the internet is not a certain speed, we all get impatient, including myself. So, and the biblical message here is that it places sometimes waiting and not going the convenient route builds character. And that's one element that's, I think, really missing. When you get things quickly, you haven't really struggled for it, you don't understand or appreciate it. And in that process, oftentimes, a lot of character can be built. Character comes through enduring difficulty, not like by looking for an easy way out. What are the implications for the youth ministry is that if they're always looking, spiritual results in the lives of young people take time. And this is true. Like, it's a journey. It's not something that they're going to feel instantly. And if they look for shortcuts or are unwilling to apply themselves, they will not attain a great level of spiritual maturity. And that also goes for ourselves as we minister to our youth. You're not gonna, if a youth doesn't want to come to Sunday school or a youth is not being responsive, it's not gonna happen overnight. Okay, it takes a lot of going back and forth. It takes a lot of effort. It's gonna take a lot of strength and diligence for you to sort of sway them towards you or towards the youth ministry and church. What is the behavior of selfism? First is the obsession with appearance. The emphasis on self in our culture leads to almost this neurotic obsession with self. Physical appearance. I don't really need to get to this. You guys know about this more than I do. It's funny. I was making this observation the other day. Is that growing up, I probably never even saw myself on camera like once or twice. But now, everybody, the youth today, including you guys, the selfies and the videos, like you probably have a video of, I probably never seen myself on video growing up. And so now with technology and everything that's happening, there's selfies every day, there's videos of yourself every day. It's just really interesting how things have changed. And with that obviously comes the amount of things you do to make yourself look different. And it's all over Instagram, all the different things people do to themselves to change their appearance. We obviously all know about fashion and label clothing and wearing all the hip stuff. And if this one influencer wears it this way, then I gotta wear it that way. This is in and this is not. To say that we're obsessed by this would be an understatement. It's everywhere. Obviously, we have the distraction of entertainment. I don't really need to delve into this much. You understand the influence of music and entertainment on our youth and how that can be a major distraction. And within that, you have many subcultures that are created within the music genre. Do you like hip hop? Do you like rock? Do you like, I don't even know What other music types are there anymore? You have media, you have movies. And the immediacy of technology, again, with the speed that we spoke about of technology, pushing things forward, how that's affected a lot of things. Youth now have access to technology where we didn't have before, and how technology has affected communication. You know, I'm speaking like an old man, but I feel this generation doesn't know how to write full sentences anymore, because we just use text messages and abbreviation. And so the grammar used in text messages, it's like I don't even, you know, so that's just something that we found interesting. Okay, so we shall take a little break. I've been speaking for way too long. Let's take a 10-minute break. When we get back, we will tackle our first case study in groups, and how you guys are saying, I guess we could have 2 groups here. So let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes and tackle our first case study. Okay. So I have a lot of copies here. Do you have? Oh, you have? Okay. So my wife actually came across this article. She was just reading it. It's from the acclaimed People magazine. So I would like you guys to get in groups, you know, maybe groups of 3, and read this article. Talk about it's basically a cashier's interpretation of events that just happened in Sephora, which is a very highly acclaimed makeup store from what I hear. And basically, I would like you guys to discuss the following in your group. Which beliefs of selfism did the girls demonstrate? Which values of selfism did the girls demonstrate? And what behavior and symbols of selfism was demonstrated by the girls in this article? And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know, and you can start. I'll give you about 10 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes.
And then like delved into the other parts of the question. So like for example, the fact that she spent or almost spent $900 is materialistic and self-centered. That she has duplicates of the same products in her basket means she's preoccupied with physical appearances, and maybe the products also provide her status. And she's also buying what she doesn't necessarily need. So again, more materialism. And then for narcissism, she's fighting with her mom about these products. She's also has entitlement, so that's also narcissism because her sister's encouraging her, saying it's mom's money. And she's like trying to buy these at the expense of her mom. So that's also narcissism. And then hedonism, her sister said that's so normal. So if it feels good, if it feels good, it look like it is good. So she's kind of normalizing her to spend this much money because like it's normal. I think that's all I yeah, that's all I have for those three.
Thank you. That represents both the United States. Father, do you have some points? boys, you'll notice girls and how they dress more so. Because of that, they're influenced by that mentality. As we move on, we talk about reduction. So a further trend in youth culture is in which the way people, the issues that youth are now being influenced are sort of confronting. So the idea is the issues that were once being dealt with at a high school, higher levels of high school and early university, they're now being dealt with as early teens or preteens. And you'll see this, and you know this. Like this is a fact. We're living with it. Whether it be ideas of sexuality, dating, premarital, like so on and so forth. The list goes on and on and on in the things that our youth are seeing. And now with obviously technology, that heighten, that exponentially makes things a lot more heightened. The shapers of youth culture, entertainment industry, music, TV, video games. Video games is back in our day. I used to sit in the basement and play Mario Kart or Mario and Nintendo or Duck Hunt, and it was fun. Now it's like you're a gamer. Like it's a thing. It's a lifestyle. It's a being. Like to be a gamer. And there's even like you even see it. Like people can sometimes get addicted to video games where they stay hours on end just playing video games. Internet, technology, marketing, those marketers are very bad. School, of course, is a major thing. I'm just teasing you. And then we have obviously the role of families is often overlooked. And as we alluded to earlier, and we spoke about in this article, regardless of saying, it really all starts at the home. It really all starts with the role of the family, with the role of the parents, and what is at home, what is happening at home. Parental influence, an example in growing up years, has an important role to play in the culture young people buy into. Culture could be as easy as what sports they want to start them off with. What activities are they pushing them towards? It's usually the parents who are not oftentimes pushing towards a certain thing because they feel there's a value there, and that can lead them towards a specific culture. Obviously, the amount of love that a young person experiences, whether it's through their family or extended family, and their ability not only to receive love but to express love. In this new generation of text messaging, of everything, we find that it is often that gets lost is the ability to communicate. Right? We're all noticing that the ability to have just a discussion face to face, and because it's much easier to text something. It's much easier to text something that's a major thing, that's a major decision, or a major, you're saying something with a lot of emotional context, but it's much easier to text it than to say it. Obviously, influencing young people is what models or example they see in front of them at a young age. So, what are the characteristics of youth culture? So, a profile of a secular generation. Basically, as we all know, we have the TV generation. We all grew up with this. A very visual mode of absorbing information because we've grown up watching TV and the influence of TV in our life, meaning that it's easy to become bored with a talking head here. He uses this term talking head. So watching me talk is a lot better, it's obviously a lot more boring than watching a show. it's a lot more entertaining. So again, we lose that ability, that attention to stay on board and always looking for entertainment rather than focusing on things for personal growth. An interesting point the author talks about is having a simplistic view of life. You know, sitcoms, I don't know, do you guys watch sitcoms anymore, or just, okay, we still watch sitcoms? Good. You know, a sitcom is usually half an hour. So you have a major problem, is solved within half an hour. The whole world's problems are done in half an hour. So you end up having this simplistic view of life that whatever problem it may be, it will be solved within that half an hour. Technology generation, we spoke a lot about this, and what really makes this even worse is you have this gap between young people and their parents. And I think what even makes this more dangerous as we get along is that I think parents, not just, you know, kids know how to use technology and parents don't, or there's that gap is growing, but you have that parents don't maybe understand the dangers of technology that their kids are using, and they think it might be innocent, or they think it might be just fun, or just keep them entertained. But there's that real gap that can cause a lot of harm. As we all know, it creates this dependence on being plugged in. I myself, I'm a, you know, you could say I'm addicted to my phone. I don't know, like, you know, we're all constantly messaging or looking for emails or seeing who called us. We're all constantly wanting to be plugged in, and that's even more so, and it's even heightened as you know, in younger kids, because their brains aren't developed, and or they get it at an age where they're not fully ready for that, to have a phone or to have that technology exposure to that technology around them. It has created something called the temporary generation. So unlike previous generation, young people take change for granted. You know, many don't expect to stay in the same job or even a career for any length of time. Many are skeptical about long-term commitments. You know, everything is changing. From fashion is quickly changing. Popular fads come and go. You know, I'm often in my workplace, I'm often hiring, and I often say that, you know, I'd rather have a 50 or 60-year-old person, because I know the young person is not going to hang around. And I actually see this. Even though this textbook isn't written recently, these things are true. There is this something about the newer generation where, you know, there's that lack of commitment, and part of it could be to blame that the employer maybe isn't as committed to them as well. But oftentimes, it's the idea is that, you know, come and go. I don't need to have that commitment to my work as was once thought to be something that was admirable. This is further obviously made worse by the temporary society or unwillingness to wait. You know, fast food restaurants, microwave ovens, obviously it's a little dated here, credit cards, Uber Eats, skip the dishes. You can get anything at your door within 15 to 20 minutes. You know, it's unbelievable. Sometimes I order stuff on Amazon just so I could see how fast it could come. I'll order a comb and it will come next day in like its own box. It's actually unbelievable. But anyways, that's just my own little rant. I'm not complaining, but when something breaks down, often the first reaction is, you know, replacing it rather than repairing it. Another category of the generation is it's a troubled generation. It contains more young people who are victims of divorce, abuse, neglect, violence. And so as a result of all these things, you know, there's a lot of youth exhibit low self-esteem, loneliness, stress, worry, and so on and so forth. I found this quite interesting. The paradoxes of youth culture. And why I find this interesting is the way in the text it breaks it down is that in your first interaction with the youth, you might think they're one thing, but the reality is they're the polar opposite. Okay, and we'll get into that, why this is. So intimacy versus isolation. Because home life has lacked intimacy and security sometimes in this youth's life, many people are hungry for meaningful relationships. So they want to connect people, you know, to connect with people at a deep level. But they don't have that they haven't learned the skills to do that. Again, sometimes they're hidden so much behind the technology that they don't know how to have a genuine relationship sometimes. And consequently, rather than achieving this intimacy, they rather retreat into themselves and become lonely. and they search for intimacy in other ways. Okay, so something, basically to keep in mind that this person might seem isolated, but the reality is they don't know how to have a relationship. They don't know how to have a relationship with their fellow students in the youth group class, or they don't know how to have a relationship with you at their youth servant. So oftentimes when we see somebody who's quiet, let's try to dig deeper and find out why they're so quiet. It could be that they're just a shy person and you don't want to just go in there right away, but keep in mind that it could be that they're just having difficulty having that sort of relationship. Tribalism versus individualism. It's always very important, and one of the main drawing factors that your youth will want to come to church is that they have friends, they have their clique, they have the group of people that they want to hang around with. The idea is that tribalism, has its advantage, but young people often don't like having to make sacrifice in order to do so. So as much as they want to be in a group or in a tribal group, like as he calls it, they still want to be individualistic and not say, well, I don't want to do it that way. So there's always that ongoing sort of battle that way. Spiritually needed versus indifference to the church. And we talked about this time and time again, how one of the postmodern thoughts is spirituality, because people are looking for something extra. So you'll often find that there is that need or that yearning for a greater spiritual need, but they're less inclined to look to church for it. Okay, they're less inclined to go to the church and find it there. So it's important to be able to be aware of that. Optimism versus cynicism. He says that often youth are very optimistic about themselves or what they want in life or what they can achieve. They think they're going to save the world, but they're cynical of how the world might treat them, or they're cynical of what somebody else has to offer. Informed versus ignorant. I found this very, very interesting, and I believe it's so true. They have access now to so much information, right? They know so much, but it doesn't mean they actually know the correct information, or it doesn't mean they know how to make wise decisions with the information that they have, or that they've made up their mind about this topic properly or in a proper way because of the information they have. So it's important to differentiate this, that the youth in front of you might sound informed or might sound that they have a lot of information, but have they processed the information properly? Okay, are they looking at the topics discussed, given this information in a proper way? Rebelliousness versus desire for direction. I find this so important that oftentimes a youth might come off as rebellious or not liking authority, but you'll find oftentimes that youth is the one that wants the most authority in their life, and not to be in a controlling way, but somebody who really cares and concerns for them and is able to really direct them with concern, in a proper way. They will follow someone who can earn the respect through unconditional love, self-sacrifice, and integrity. You'll often find that the ones who were most rebellious, once you win them over, can be the most loyal or the most committed to the service and to you in terms of a relationship. Apathy versus passion. Oftentimes you say, oh, young people, they don't care. They just want to, go out to the mall and they don't care about anything. But, at the same time, you give that person a worthwhile project, they will really feel energized and feel very motivated to be able to pursue that. And you'll see the energy come out if you're able to trigger that right passion in them. Sophistication versus immaturity. Again, that has to go with the amount of information that that they have or that they have access to. Just because they have more information and they might seem more sophisticated, it doesn't mean that they're mature. It doesn't mean that they're able to make the wise decision. Savvy versus naivety. Again, the same idea, that even though they might seem more technically savvy, or again have read on how to do something, doesn't necessarily mean that their experience in making the right decision. Responding to youth culture. So how can you respond to some of the biggest or the greatest question you might get from a youth? First one here is, where did we come from? The lie is that you evolved from a chance chemical reaction. And in the eyes of young people, the implications of this lie are, there is no God, you are a cosmic accident without intrinsic value, and life has no direction. So there's no designer for life, therefore no sign of purpose, you're just being alive, you're just living. The result is obviously a loss of personal value. What are the implications of this? Low self-esteem and worthlessness. They have not been affirmed that they're important. They have not been affirmed that they have a purpose, or that you were put on this world on this earth for a purpose, and therefore you can easily, retreat into thoughts of low self-esteem and worthlessness, and that can lead to dangerous things such as depression and suicide. Bell puts on this media campaign every January, talking about mental health and raising awareness to mental health. It's a real thing. It's increasing. We're creating more awareness about it because it's so prevalent in society. Who we really are. The lie is that you are whoever you want to be. And in the eyes of young people, the implications of this lie are, man is good, so there's no such thing as a sinful nature. There is no absolute right or wrong, since you could be whoever you want to be. There's no right or wrong. There's no consequence. There's no accountability. And God can be found in anything. Therefore, a process of self-discovery is often embarked on. The result is obviously a loss of absolute truth. The implications are immorality and indecency. No longer people have clear guidelines, so they end up doing whatever they want to do. It can lead to crime and violence, obviously, because of this. And third is, where are we going? And so the lie is, the future is unknowable, who knows? And in the eyes of young people, the implications of this lie are, you make your own destiny. There is no purpose or plan for your life. You are accountable to no one, so live for yourself and get out of life what you can. And there is no final judgment. Life has no meaning because there's no afterlife. The result is the loss of purpose and destiny. So what are the implications of this? Hopelessness and despair obviously can arise at this, because you're not going anywhere. You're just going to go with the flow. There's no reason to fight to make yourself better. There's no reason to fight to find the right way. You go with the flow instead of swimming upstream or against what your intuition is telling you. Selfishness and substance abuse, believing that meaning in life is found in the present and not the future, leads to a philosophy that allows young people to satisfy one desire with little consequence for the future. And you might know that growing up, knowing people who are making decisions for today, making shortcuts for today, and not keeping in mind what can happen to the future. What are the repercussions for my future if I do this now? How do we answer these three questions? And it's very nicely done in the text on how this is answered. And again, it's all biblically based. A sense of personal value through relational intimacy. So the following will characterize an effective ministry. An emphasis on our identity. It's very important, because as the youth goes through high school and enter into university, the sense of identity becomes really the motivating factor of how you choose what you want to be, the decisions you're going to make later in life. It's very important that you really emphasize on that. We are made in God's image, and when we trust Christ, He comes into our lives and makes us a new creation. An environment in which everyone is valued, an environment of trust and acceptance. A sense of absolute truth through biblical teaching. So a commitment to the authority and reliability of the scriptures. Again, it comes back to the Bible. A Bible study that is relevant and engaging, and the expectation that scripture will be applied. And a sense of purpose and destiny through sacrificial mission. A strategy to help each person identify and use their gifts. This is very important, and I know, when I was involved in the youth ministry, we did this often. We used to have a band. We used to have certain youth that had specific talents. We're able to use it in the ministry. So that's one of the reasons those modes are employed. Opportunities to be involved together in service and mission. We all know the mission trips that we go on as a church, and emphasis on eternal judgments and rewards. Again, looking at the long picture. So how do you mission to young people? We began this course. One of the first statements I said is that our mission is reaching young people is a cross-cultural endeavor, and that's what's sort of said in the textbook there. So we've looked at cross-cultural mission, and now we have spent some time coming to understand the culture in which the young people live in. So how do you mission to young people? First of all, to understand the word mission, we want to understand where that came from throughout history and where it's headed to and where we are now. Okay. First, there was the pre-Christian era. So when you consider when after around Jesus' time or right after, you had the church that began as a small group within a hostile Jewish environment, and they gathered as a tight community, and the church was called to minister to this hostile environment. Okay. And then as you move on, the Christian era, the church now is no longer a hostile environment. It is very well known. It has spread out throughout all of society. And the church influence permeated everything from education to government to the arts to community life. So, to use the term hostile doesn't apply there. But eventually, over time, it kind of lost its message, lost its meaning, became a little bit corrupt and maybe a little bit overly influenced by society. And then you get to the post-Christian era, which is what we're in right now. And the idea is the church finds itself with a mix of hostility and indifference. So you have people attacking the church, which is real right now. Right now, I think the main message, we're always attacking the Christian beliefs, always attacking the Christian ideologies. And then you also have the other challenges, indifference. People just don't care. People stop coming to church and they don't care about Christianity in general. So a few things to keep in mind, or a few items to keep in mind when we're talking about the post-Christian era, is secular versus spiritual. So the idea is we want to preach in a way where the secular and the spiritual can be one. It's not separated. There isn't that difference. The idea is you are Christian and you act in your Christian manner in every endeavor that you do throughout your life. And we need to equip people here to live as salt and light in the world. The other idea here is clergy versus laity. So people thought it was the role of the clergy strictly to do the role of the mission. But we know now that that's, as we see how our church is with the youth of service, and the purpose of having this whole course is to be able to teach people to minister, not clergy, but lay people, to teach how to minister to the youth. And obviously to be able to be as inclusive as possible to different nationality, different backgrounds, and so on and so forth. What are the young people's attitudes to church? Well, I think a lot of these things we may have experienced at some time or heard of it. Church is boring, church is irrelevant, it can be quite judgmental. So these are some of the attitudes that they may have. So as we reach here, these are some of the common themes, and I want to focus on these themes, and it will be the focus of our final case study today. I really like this because it can provide us with the main bullet points of how we can approach our personal ministry with your youth, and what items you can use, and how you can use these topics to really emphasize your ministry or strengthen your ministry or your relationship with them. First is truth. Okay, at first they thought liberalism would make churches more appealing to the young, but now they're finding that the Bible-believing churches, are the ones that are more successful. And it's interesting. This is a very important thing to realize in the psyche of youth. Churches that preach with conviction and uphold a clear standard of morality tend to inspire young people. The idea is consistency, right? Youth actually want consistency. I know it might sound boring at first, but when youth find that consistency and that you're going constantly back to the Bible and you're being truthful in what you're saying, it holds volume. It holds a lot of weight, and it can. They want that. At the end of the day, they want that authenticity and that consistency in that relationship and how you kind of preach that word to them. Acceptance. We all want acceptance. We all want it. They don't want dogmatism that judges them or marginalizes them and their culture. They want to be able to ask questions and express doubts while they seek it. It's important that you take the questions and you take their doubts in a very thoughtful way, in a very sensitive way, and you make them feel that, yeah, those are great feelings, and those are great questions. We're gonna work at them together. We're gonna work through them together. Relevance. They want a church that's attracted to, and cultural, has a cultural relevance to them. And we do that in all sorts of things, by doing activities that they will like, by going, for example, to a Raptors game. When you take out youth to that, that's something it's a group activity and you're doing something that they enjoy, that they want to go be a part of. Relationship, and obviously we all kind of want this as well, is that they want to be able to go to their youth ministry where they can have relationship with others. They want an atmosphere where it can be relaxed. They can kind of mingle with others who are like them, who see the world similar to them. So they want a conducive atmosphere that's before or after the service. Authenticity. Increasing young people respond to authenticity, which stands in contrast to superficial culture. They want to hear people. I think it's important that you obviously want to do it with judgment, but when you're sharing stories or you want to be real with them, they want to see a real person. They don't want to necessarily see a perfect person. You want to be real. You want to share with them some challenges that you had growing up. You have to be careful about what challenges you share, because some might be age appropriate, some may not. They may have the maturity to kind of share that or take that information from you. I'll leave that up to you, or you can deal with that as you wish. But it's important to be authentic and real with them, and not create this vision of what an ideal, of maybe who you are as a person. That's not a real thing. Be real with them. They want that because they want something to connect with. Experience. Young people want to be attracted to a God that's not limited to words in the book. They're drawn to a church that fosters a sense of God's immediate presence. I love seeing how the youth are often attracted to going to tasbihah, or they're going to church services, or ones who are still very eager to serve in the altar. I'm sure that serves something to them. I'm sure that serves that they feel that a bit of an experience there by partaking in the liturgy or partaking in tasbihah, and so on and so forth. Respect. Obviously, we all want to be treated with respect, and especially youth, in the sense of they often they think quite highly of themselves. So it's important that you don't treat them too tall. You don't tell them, oh, you're just a little kid. They want to feel that listen to them, and you want to give them opportunities to serve and participate in leadership roles in the service. Practicality. It's important that the church lives what it preaches, and they're attracted to churches that offer practical support to needy people in the environment. I recently got involved with a church with the food banks. I'm sure some of you have volunteered, and I was so proud of the work that our church has done. We operate, 3 food banks in Mississauga. We are one of the busiest food banks in all of Mississauga. Now, we don't necessarily give all the food out. We get funded food through Food Banks Mississauga, but we have to have space for them. We have volunteer. We have a huge network of volunteers that do it. And so seeing that service really blew my mind away. So it's something that's important to keep things practical and do activities that we emphasize what we're teaching. Practice what we preach, right? All right. So we have a case study coming up. Why don't we take a 10-minute break and then or 5 to 7 minute break, and then we'll break into our final case study for the day. So I would like us, and the idea of this is to get as specific as possible. I really want very specific ideas when you're kind of finishing off this case study. Using the common themes discussed below, so all these themes that we just talked about earlier that we emphasized, provide a detailed plan on how you would deepen a youth's connection with the youth service, as well as yourself as a servant, using the following themes. Please be as specific as possible in your examples. So it's almost like an action plan of how would you go about in deepening your relationship or deepening that youth who doesn't want to come, doesn't feel connected to the church, that you want to kind of bring them closer, have them have a deeper relationship with the church. So I don't know if you guys want to do these in groups or do them separately. Maybe why don't we do them? You could do them in groups, but and then we can have maybe each person from the group or different people, members of the group, can talk about the different items separately. Okay, so I'll give you guys about 10, 15 minutes or so. All right. Okay, guys. So I'm really anxious to hear some of your kind of approaches to this. I think these are very nicely worded sort of principles that you could use in your ministry. They're quite applicable. And the reason I asked sort of that we use these because I could see them, sorry, I can see them having sort of a real profound impact on how you view your ministry and how you view how you're gonna outreach to your youth and develop those relationships with your youth. So how would you like to begin? We can, once you guys go, can we have your group start off and you guys could take each item.
I guess you were saying just that like this is the one thing you guys said and I didn't. So like, we just skip through.
Yeah, we kind of like didn't go into it.
You skipped truth. You skipped the truth. Yes, you could definitely go out of it. That's fine.
Practical, for example, when you're giving a lesson, if you want, or you're giving a talk or something, you want to like stray away from like extremes and stuff. Like if you want something to be practical and like understood by youth, especially high schoolers, you gotta like be smart about the way you state things and the way that you say things. Like if, for example, if you're giving a talk about like this is an actual example, if you were giving a talk on like alcohol and something to kids that like have an issue or are growing up in a culture that doesn't have something with alcohol, don't like pair it with something that they like view as extremely terrible, because as soon as you do that, like everything becomes unpractical to them and like just not credible, I guess.
Okay. Okay, I see what you're saying. Practicality or maybe a bit of relevance as well, like
Yeah.
something that they can say, okay, yeah, this makes sense to me in my life right now.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, very good point.
Like just speaking about experience, I feel like we were just actually talking about like grade 12s are coming in with so much knowledge to begin with. So sometimes just overloading them with more knowledge is not as a great of an experience for them. So they want something where you're showing God's like light through even through service or outreach or just showing different ways of how to be a like a Christ-like child as opposed to just piling on more theological like knowledge.
Very good point. So which one of those do you think that would hit?
Experience. And,
Right.
yeah, experience and maybe respect.
Okay. Then
I was gonna talk about relevance. It's like I think it was more important to like identify what are the trends going on in the youth's like lives, like what stuff are they bringing into the class, like stuff they're joking about or like talking about or stuff like they do on their free time, and then try to bring that into like whether it's like in the lesson or just talking about it with the kids, like so that they kind of like they have something, it kind of sparks their memory and makes them remember, oh, we talked about this game, that's something, and then all of a sudden they're interested in like what's going on. They feel like their lives are like not like in different worlds with church and
absolutely, absolutely, very good. It's important to take that extra step when you're preparing your lesson or whatever you're doing, is because you're not. Sometimes we have a mission and we want to get this information, but how are you going to relate it to them? And it's important to use those ways.
I guess for authenticity, we said like, well, it's authenticity and relationship, but like more of like the older they get, the more, well, the less they need more of like an authoritative figure and more they need like a friend and like companionship. Like he said, like by the time they reach like we reach grade 12, we're not really looking for like a teacher as much. You're more or less looking for like a good like a mentor and also like a friend that has experiences, like lived through experiences you've been through. So just like actually sharing like real life experience other than like, I know like when you're younger you're not supposed to like share as much of like stuff like struggles and stuff, but the older you are the more like the relationships are built more of like, if you have an issue that is like appropriate to share, that you can like actually share and discuss it with your kids, because it makes you seem more like a human being, I guess, to them.
Right, absolutely. Getting deep and getting specific and getting not using generalizations all the time. Getting to real specific examples of things they're going through. It speaks volumes. It can be very effective. So
I can like speak on judgmental a bit. Like I feel, especially like I would say growing up, like I'm 30 right now, but growing up, we felt like the church was very like narrow-minded. Like I felt like our generation thought the church was more focused on, just because that was the way our parents grew up, and we were pressed based on that. But just understanding that when we come with a new lesson or a new topic or something that they're dealing with, understanding that some people in the class may be dealing with it as we're speaking it to them. So when you press that, let's say this is a sin, this is a sin, this is a sin, you're speaking directly to people that are sinning in front of you, and it comes across as judgmental as opposed to trying to support them and trying to serve them.
okay, good point.
that was kind of
Okay.
Okay, for truth, we're talking about how the Bible is the ultimate truth, like the living word of God. So everything that we bring up should be related to it somehow. Like displaying how like the life of the church that we live in, all the sacraments we do go back to the Bible, and how nothing is just made up or random and irrelevant. And maybe like a more specific way we can tackle this is having like question and answer sessions about like issues in the world and things that we do at church, because everything relates to the Bible because it has all the answers to and truths. For acceptance, um, I was thinking that we should like really hammer in the fact that someone's actions is different from themselves. Like it's not them, like it's not their identity, because that's really big. Like your belief is who you are, which is not technically the truth in a lot of cases. And like teaching them how to be firm in their truth, but also loving at the same time and trying to discern what is good and what is not, and how to navigate the acceptance area. And a practical way would be inviting people from their school to church to maybe experience that with them.
Very nice. I like that.
For relevance, like, we talked about how like all of the lessons that we do like in class or the activities kind of like have like a practical takeaway so that like kids don't really come in feeling like, you know, they're just thrown with like a Bible story and then they go home and, you know, they know a Bible story. But like it's something that they can actually like learn something from and apply to their day-to-day life. And this would look like something different depending on the age group, right? And so just like some discernment there. And also like bringing in like social issues and talking about them in class, I feel like is important because, you know, I feel like part of like what like the church struggles with sometimes is being like up to date with what's going on in the world and kind of like making sure that, you know, we talk to the kids first before the world teaches them, basically.
Absolutely.
And so, and always tying that back to like what the Bible says about these social issues. For relationship, we talked about like, you know, having the opportunity for fellowship. Like we know that a lot of kids come to Sunday school because their friends are there. And so to give them those opportunities to, you know, like enjoy their friends and also like bond with like the servants and like, you know, the priests in our church, and kind of like develop those connections is super important for them to be willing to stay in the future. And like activities such as like sports days, like March break camp and field trips and like retreats and are all great examples for youth to actually make friends and connect with servants. For authenticity, I think like one of the things we talked about was, you know, how to like humble ourselves as servants, not to feel like we have authority over our children, but to kind of like see them as a friend, or even like a mentor if we're like, you know, if there's a bigger age gap. And also to put in effort to understand the kids and their culture, and by being practical and sharing like personal experiences, while also be like while also being careful of like not being too vulnerable with them, because I think
Yes.
there is like a fine line between like, you know, exposing like your mistakes to your kids and but also you want to show them that like, you know, as every like we all struggle and we
Right.
can all like overcome like our struggles, and to kind of give them that sort of hope that like, you know, if I can do it, then you can do it too.
Great.
And I feel like that's kind of like part of being authentic. Father, do you have anything to add that you want to?
Yeah, in the middle of the week was I was in the gym, and as a kid, it's 18 years old. He came up to me. I didn't know he was watching me all along
Okay.
while I was doing my acrobatics,
Okay.
and he was admiring me after all this. At the end of my almost my ending of my training, and I said, "He come up to me, and I see watches you all along," and I said, and it's unbelievable. He says, but he had a problem about talking.
Okay.
You know what? Those kid who was born with
Speech impediment or something.
Aesthetic.
Okay.
They stuttered,
Okay.
and I let him talk, and I just listen. I collected. So I want to build a relation to this guy.
Okay. Good.
This is what I'm gonna talk about relationship.
Right.
So I listened to him, and he told me a lot of things. And I said, "Wow, you know, it's amazing how you do things. I watch you," he says, and you just keep moving. And I said, "Well, okay." He goes, "How do you build your, you know, your endurance?" And it's so strong. I said, "Well, you know what? And I had this problem." So now he told me that he had problems.
Okay.
So okay, you know, if you wanna do things like the way where I'm up, so do it one step at a time. Don't collect everything up, then you do it on your own.
Right.
You'll get discouraged. So I'm trying to build a relation with this guy because we just met.
Yes. Yes.
So eventually I'm gonna come up with the truth.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I asked him how old is he, and he said he's 17, and he doesn't have friends. Like I mean, only a few things. Like one of those kids that had issues.
Right. Right.
So you know, you gotta really talk with them, encourage them to do things that you do. So anyway, based on my experience as well, I wanna lead with him, help him out, just like I lead the other friends that I had, talking about the truth.
Right.
You know, speaking about Christianity, there's a lot of Christian going on right now, and we don't know which is the truth now because everybody speak of the truth.
Yes.
So we have to kind of tell them from the beginning of Christianity. So what I'm saying here, the acceptance of them.
Right.
You gotta accept their idea, right? In order for you to put your input. In speaking of the truth.
Yeah.
Because you just put on your idea right away, it doesn't work.
You're right.
You know, it doesn't work. So you gotta accept them for what they are. It's the same thing with the person that came up to me two couple of days ago, and I want to build it slowly,
Right.
just like the way I did to the other friends that I had. So now they're input.
Right. Right.
You know,
That's great.
speaking of the kingdom of God, it's a very important.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
Based on my experience, yes, that's how I created things out, because I'm in this position where I have to be more authentic of what I'm saying and be a
Right.
leadership
Right.
and stand firm to what I am, right? Because you can't lead if you're so, you know what I mean, excelling up yourself all the time. You can't do that because it doesn't attract other people.
Right.
Being as a Christian, like we said, you know.
Right.
So, what else I can say? Again, it's back to I guess I set everything up. So respect
Okay.
others. You know?
Yeah.
You gotta respect others' idea,
Right.
to what they are.
Very good. You guys have any group have anything else to add? That was okay. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate your input. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I'll see you at the end of March when we'll talk about a bit more youth culture, but mainly start to get into communication and styles of communication. Thank you, guys. Have a great evening.